If we want to do that, we can only do that on a global level. If we want some proper rules in our financial markets, because we're worried that one or two things have gone wrong, you can't just do it at a European level. You've got to do it sitting down, round a table, with America, with Japan, with the other countries. And what I'm arguing for intergovernmental global cooperation, and I'm arguing that Britain, as an independent voice, with all her special relationships around the world, would have a very positive and good role.
My main work is on climate change.
Yeah.
Okay. 97% of scientists agreed on climate change. Let's not get into this.
I don't want to discuss the merits of climate change or not.
And the person who asked the question. Now, the point about the European Union, it has actually led the way, and that is one of its most profound things that it has done and most usefully done. I went to a meeting recently of Nobel scientists. There were 50 Nobel scientists who said, thank goodness the European Union is leading the way. It can actually begin to influence the rest of the world in the way that one or two countries
Okay, now
can't.
deal with the other questioner's point about the fact he believes that there's been an element of deception in the way
I actually don't believe there's an element of deception from the politicians. I do believe, though, the case has not been put over properly by national governments, and I don't believe the British government spent its time saying we're going to protect you from Europe, which isn't the way you sell an issue. And the other thing is the media. There are a few newspapers who are supportive of the European Union. The vast majority, primarily the Murdoch press, is passionately anti, and the information has not been getting out.
Does that explain the antipathy to the EU constitution in France and the Netherlands? They don't have the Murdoch press.
I actually genuinely believe that the argument in France and the Netherlands was confused by a whole variety of issues, which was what you get when you get referendums suddenly thrown at people. And it's a much more complicated than just
the vote in France came when Chirac was at a sort of absolute bottom of his popularity, and people, whatever Chirac proposed, people were going to vote against it.
All right.
But
French people didn't know what they were
Yes, I do. Yeah, the French people. Then there's
they had a terrific debate about it.
Yes, but there's a full body of evidence of this in France. That
no, Chirac, doesn't count, does it?
Chirac, no, let me finish.
No, they're wrong.
I've got an opinion.
They're wrong.
Nigel, I've got an opinion here. You're shouting me down. I'm going to answer it. In Chirac, there's a full body of opinion from France that whatever Chirac proposed at the time was going to be counted down because Chirac was a singly unpopular president at the time. But the gentleman's question was about creeping measures, and I think there's a lot of measures that come through European debate that we don't hear about, and they're very positive. When you go out of here tonight, you know, you'll go see the main road passing here, and there'll be lorries and coaches going by which would have been made or driven from other European countries. I spent 5 years on the Transport Committee looking at measures to make sure those lorries satisfied standards, so we didn't have to worry about the brakes or the quality of those vehicles.
And will they have mirrors on the
side? We all have to do them. And you know, I wrote a report in the European Parliament that outlawed discrimination against disabled people when they were travelling by air. There were only six in the European Parliament who voted against it, and they were all from Nigel's UK Independence Party.
All right, let's go.
They vote against things which will benefit huge numbers of ordinary people.
Let's go to another question.
The fishermen and the farmers who...
There's more disabled people than there are fishermen.
The post office.
Let's go to another question, Christopher. You'll like this one. This is from Amal Raho. Amal Raho, your question.
Thanks. Will a more integrated EU increases the nation-state's foreign policy impact?
Will a more integrated EU increase the nation-state's foreign policy impact? And this is your Yugoslavia question, Christopher Buka.
Oh, come on.
Talk about Yugoslavia. Go on, talk about Yugoslavia right now.
The question is very interesting, but in fact, Yugoslavia was a long time ago. It is true that back in 1990, when the Yugoslav Republic was beginning to break up, that the EU did, it wasn't actually the EU then, but it was the European Community, thought, this is a great chance. Here's something happening in Europe, terribly important. We will go as the European Community and we will intervene and try to sort out the problem that is arising. Guess which side they came down on? Did they come down on the side of Slovenia and Croatia and Bosnia, who were all struggling to get free from the communist-imposed Central Federation? No. They spent some time in Belgrade and they came down firmly on the side of Mr. Milosevic.
What?
Yeah, sorry, it's all in my book, The Great Deception. You should read it sometimes.
But does
it
that
tells
make it
you
right?
a lot of...
Because it's in your book, does it make it right?
No, because my... No, on the contrary, my book is based on a lot of very careful research and homework.
My point,
and one of the things that startles me about people who love this European entity is how little they know about its history. Honestly, I could spend, not now, but sometime, I could take you through for an hour or two asking you a lot of questions about the history of it, how this came about, what happened then, and I bet you wouldn't get more than about 5%
Robert Evans,
of the answers correct.
No, hold on.
You have got a received version which appears on the Commission website, which tells you the history, and it bears very little relation to most of the facts.
Okay, Robert Evans.
I don't pretend to be an expert on Yugoslavia, but I've been to Yugoslavia when it was Yugoslavia, and I've been to several other countries part of it. So,
tell us who the Troika was.
Look, but when ordinary people in Yugoslavia were not looking for it to be broken up. Ordinary millions of people in Yugoslavia.
Did you consult them?
Well,
did you have a referendum?
I know that there were plenty of Serbs married to Bosnians. There were plenty of Slovenes.
Let's not get into the interstices of the Yugoslav crisis.
What I was going to make earlier
the EU's own role, please.
That when Croatia declared independence, Germany immediately recognised independence of Croatia for a whole variety of historical reasons. Now, if there had been if they hadn't been able to do that, I think we could have gone a long way to avoiding. Now, you may not want to do this because from what I've sensed, you've gathered that I don't say that the war was a good thing, but the breakup of Yugoslavia was a good thing. I actually think that the war, the death, and the misery that it ensued was a bad thing, and I don't think anybody could possibly defend that.
Evans,
and I think that Europe could have worked together. A strong Europe could have worked together to save the Yugoslav people.
Before it all started, Robert Evans, I think the then EU, the head of the council said, this is the hour of Europe. Jacques Post, wasn't it? The Luxembourg foreign minister. He said, this is the hour of Europe. And actually what ensued was the greatest slaughter in peacetime European history.
Oh, absolutely. And I think if
what does that tell you about, what does that tell you about Europe's capability in foreign policy?
You see, and I referred back to one country making independent recognition of Croatia. If Europe
Germany,
had been
and it was quite
well, let him, Christopher, let him finish. Let him finish, please.
He's had a long speech, and he's made a point about Germany and Croatia.
I don't want to get into the interstices of this conflict. I want to get into the European capacity for foreign policy.
My point being that if Europe had been, with a chairman of the European Council or president of the European Council or a foreign person working together to draw together 27 countries, like we do in the European Parliament, to get a consensus of opinion on foreign policy, I think the slaughter in Yugoslavia could have been avoided. And I'm absolutely certain if Europe had to have one voice, then the position to what happened with Iraq, probably Afghanistan, with Iraq, would have certainly been different. If you had to get 27 countries to agree, you'd have come along with something different.
Nigel Farage, briefly, we've only got 2 minutes left. I mean,
we're pushing on. We're pushing on with an EU foreign policy at breakneck speed. Embassies are being set up around the world. A foreign minister is about to be chosen. And what will happen very shortly, I predict, is they'll say, well, it's very difficult to get 27 to agree. So what we have to do is to get rid of member states' vetoes, and we will have a European foreign policy which will not suit Britain's interest in the world.
We will develop a rational policy based on the rule of law. And as Robert said,
without
Yugoslavia was a mistake in Europe, but we wouldn't have gone into Iraq. And Iraq was a massive mistake, which Britain took on its own with the United States alone.
OK, we just have a very few minutes left, and I'm going to one last question for which I want short as possible answers. It's from Monica Northwick. Monica Northwick, your question. Yeah.
According to you guys, should Tony Blair be the next EU president?
Should Tony Blair be the next EU president, Peter Luff?
Speaking personally, no. Somebody who leads us into a war as disastrous as Iraq shouldn't be an EU president. I'm speaking personally.
Robert Evans.
No.
I think if you wanted somebody who's got charisma, talent and extraordinary experience, Tony Blair would be the right person. I suspect that some of the other countries will look for a low-profile person who can be the person drawing the consensus together.
So it's 1-1 so far. OK. Nigel Farage.
He gave away £2 billion a year on our rebate. He signed us up to this constitutional treaty and didn't give us a referendum. He qualifies for the European Union with all the tests. I want him to become president because it'll bring home to Britain just how monstrous this whole project is. OK, 3-2-1 for Tony. Christopher Booker. Christopher Booker.
Well, the fact is, I'd like to start with the facts rather than wishful thinking, and he's not going to be the president.
Should he be? The
front runner at the moment is a Belgian who nobody's ever heard of, even most of the Belgians, called Mr. Rumpy.
He's the Prime Minister.
And I'm looking forward to years and years of rumpy-pumpy.
So Tony Blair wins an extra time on that one, I'm afraid, but that, I'm afraid, is all the time we've got time for. Once again, though, if you'd like to be part of the audience here in London, please do call our hotline on 0208 728 6472 or send us an email at forum@presstv.co.uk. The rumpy-pumpy joke will live on. But from me, Andrew Gilligan, goodbye until next time.